I can talk all day, so stop me. I've over-answered this
question. My next question was going to be, tell us about what you grew up with.
Okay, well let me just tell you. Yeah. It was very interesting. Mother's side of the family were Southern Baptists.
You have to explain that to us a lot.
Now, Southern Baptists are the most conservative Baptists in America, sort of. There are other independent Baptist churches who think they're liberals. They're not, let me tell you now. The other part was the Pentecostals. And my father's family were all Pentecostals. If Dad went to church, it would be Easter and Christmas at the Pentecostal church, and we would go to that. And it was just amazing that my father, when he died, it was held, his funeral was at the Pentecostal church. And I'll come back to that later. But with that, my mother married 6 months later. My mother was very young when she married my father, and she came from a different generation when women were not so independent. Does that make any sense? Everybody who's here, you all know that. And this man married my mother, and 2 years later, of course, after he had beat her up, and I had him arrested, and I won't get into all that, but it was amazing. But the Pentecostals and the Baptists, I used to cut up and say, that was considered a mixed marriage in America at that time. It wasn't interracial, but it was different religions. And the Pentecostals won me over finally because I love their exuberance, not always the fanaticism that I saw, but that they had such a joy in my head as these American Pentecostals and their worship. There was just a joy that I loved. And when I founded MCC, I hope I brought that joy right into this church, because we get members, a lot of heterosexual members. And I met this couple, they were in their 80s, and they joined MCC 2 years before. And I said, why did you join the church? They said, because our church has lost their joy. And you folks haven't. You have a joy. And you come in and you feel like you've been in worship once it's over with. And like you, we know the difference, your pastor and I, between fanaticism that we've seen sometimes in Pentecostal churches and good people there. Good people. They're good people in the Pentecostal faith. And not every Pentecostal believes we're dying going to hell. I have friends who are Pentecostal bishops. I mean, behind closed doors, they'll tell you the truth. They're not about to announce it out in front of God. But I was so fortunate that, but I then went finally. I don't know if you want me to just
keep going.
Let me just tell you right quick, and we'll get over this. So we get to civil rights. But it was very, very interesting. And my Pentecostal faith, I kept wrestling. Finally, I went to my pastor at age probably 17 or 18, and I said to him, I have this problem. What is it? He said. And I talked around the mulberry bush. I didn't call myself homosexual, but I walked. Finally, after an hour, his eyes lit up, and he said, oh my God, I know what you're trying to tell me. All you need to do is marry a good woman. That'll take care of that problem. So I married his daughter. Well, 5 years later, it wasn't funny or flippant. As Troy Perry was excommunicated from the Pentecostal faith. Now, there's a price to be paid. I tell people, I had no idea when my wife and I separated that I wouldn't see either of my kids for 17 years.
So tell us a bit about the excommunication and the ministry.
It was just, you know, it was so funny. I was actually excommunicated twice by two denominations, two Pentecostal groups. First, Church of God. They wanted me out. The overseer comes in, and I want you out of town. Here's $20. Go back to Florida.
And we're talking exactly early 1960s?
Oh, yeah. Now we're talking like, I mean, just into the 60s. Okay. I was, it may have been 1959. I was 19 years old, I think. And he says, and here I'm married, and 2 kids, you know, teenagers. Here we are, and the bishop shows up and throws me out. He could do that. I then went to the Church of God of Prophecy, which was a break-off, because I knew they wouldn't talk in America. They didn't talk to each other. And so I went to them. But this time, later, once I ended up going into a bookstore and finding me some books, I went in and I was going to preach a sermon. I want to quote, somebody told me about an article in Life magazine at that time. And I was going to quote from the article something that somebody had told me, but I wanted to read exactly what it said. And while I was in there, all at once, I saw physique magazines. And I tell people today, these were the good old days when they were still wearing bathing suits, you know. But I had never seen a physique magazine, and as I'm standing there, in my head I start sweating, and finally I got up enough nerve to walk up to the woman behind the counter, and I'm standing there saying, Troy Perry, there's something, you are a homosexual. This is just eating at me. What is, what do you do? You have these feelings, you know you do. It just doesn't go away. And I said to the woman, do you have any books on homosexuality? She looked me up and down, and that made me more nervous than everything. And I wrote out a check, which was a lot of money back then, for $8.13 for this bag full of paperbacks that she had collected all this stuff. Now, most of them were novels, and they were trying to be sexy. That's not what I was looking for. There were two things in the bag that changed my life. One was called One Incorporated, published a little magazine. It was a homophile organization. That was the name they used. And it was it told me, it let me know there were people like me. I couldn't believe it. And at least this group was organized. The second thing she had put in the book was a book called The Homosexual in America by Daniel Webster Corey. And when I read that book, it changed my life all over again. He let me know there was nothing unnatural. It was the first book ever printed in America that was pro. The man later disclaimed the book. But this book so radicalized my life. And in it, I really started my, looking around, because I ended up with a partner. And so I said to him, let's go find this place. When we walked in, there were two things I noticed. Number one, we were the youngest people there. Number two, no one ever spoke to us. Number three, nobody used their real names there. And when I found at MCC, I didn't know you weren't supposed to use your real name. People, they say, Willie Smith said, you've taken out an ad in a gay newspaper giving our home address. Troy Perry, you are crazy. And people, they say, oh, Perry, you were so brave. I said, no, actually, I was stupid. I didn't know people didn't do things like that. But God sometimes, I really believe, is a personal faith, shuts your eyes to that so you can do what you're supposed to do. And Willie said, my God, the first service, the police are going to be down at the ends of the street scooping them up in nets as they come in. And I said, and finally, I said, oh, wait a minute. If people think we're going to have orgies on the altar, they're going to be sadly disappointed. That's not what this is about. And I welcome the police to come in.